Having explored 3 different gospel versions of Jesus walking on the sea, we ask once more, what exactly is going on in these stories? Is Jesus overriding the physical laws governing the universe? What does the story mean? The English phrase inspired by this event, "she thinks she can walk on water," intends to describe somebody who can accomplish the impossible with ease. Like many popular interpretations of the Bible, this one too misses the mark. All human beings actually do walk on water when it rains. However, to talk about someone walking on the sea is an entirely different thing. The Hebrew word hayam and the Greek thalassa translate to English as sea. This is a key word in this gospel story and in the entire biblical tradition. A clearer understanding of that word and reality suggests a new interpretation of this event in the life of Jesus. Let's talk about the sea. Many ancient cultures, including that of Palestine, personified much, if not all, of reality. The sea was no exception. It was not a what, but a who. In the Mesopotamian traditions, Tiamat was the primordial watery source of life, a goddess. Contemporary scholars now discount that Tiamat is the source for the biblical Tehom, which is the word for the deep or abyss, yet both words may share some root meaning. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the earth is said to be tohu vabohu. Tohu sounds a lot like Tiamat, with darkness over the Tehom, the abyss. In the story of the flood in the 600th year of Noah's life, the great Tehom, this primordial sea abyss, bursts forth. Later on, the fountains of the abyss, the Tehom, are closed. Contemporary biblical scholars correctly recognize that the basic ideas of these Semitic myths derive from a common and shared cultural perspective. The distinctive significance of the biblical tradition among these myths is that the God of Israel controls this potentially unruly sea and does not gain his mastery over it as a result by winning a battle with it. Modern biblical readers must keep these personifications in mind in order to properly appreciate biblical narratives on their own cultural terms. The sea in the Bible is not so much a what, but a who. Now let's get into seas known to biblical people. But in doing that, let's keep in mind what St. Thomas Aquinas and our medieval ancestors in the faith taught us, that all God talk, all theology, is analogy. That is, everything human beings know and say about God is rooted in human experience, which is always culturally interpreted. Bible readers want to know which seas were familiar to biblical people. Even land-bound peasants like Jesus and his followers knew about the Mediterranean Sea. In the Bible, the Mediterranean Sea is often referred to simply as Hayam, the sea, and sometimes the Great Sea. The psalmist presents a vivid description of how this body of water could turn violent and destructive. The voice of Yahweh is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. Yahweh over the mighty waters. Because this watery presence looms so large west of the land of Israel, this Hebrew word for sea, Hayam, also served as the designation for the compass direction west. And you can see why. A great other than human person, the Mediterranean Sea. Also famous from the Bible are other seas, such as the Sea of Reeds, usually translated Red Sea in Exodus. This is the sea that is crossed by ancient Hebrews in their escape from Egypt, or perhaps marsh or swamp. It is difficult to locate geographically. The sea located in the Araba region south of Palestine, the deepest point on the surface of the planet Earth, is called by different names: the Salt Sea, the Sea of the Plain, or the Eastern Sea. Its high concentration of salt and other minerals permits no visible life to exist in it, hence the ancient Roman name for it, the Dead Sea. This name is deceptive, though, because even though this sea is usually calm, occasionally severe and dangerous thunderstorms do develop. This is quite in keeping with the dense nature of this personified body of water. The Dead Sea, not so dead. And what you're looking at is not so much a body of water, a what, but a who. Finally, there is the Sea of Galilee, which figures so prominently in the Synoptic Gospels we call Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Its most ancient name was Chenereth, from the Hebrew word for harp, perhaps describing the shape of the lake, or perhaps the sound of its waters. In the Hellenistic and Roman periods, it was called Gennesaret. The Gospel we call John calls it the Lake of Tiberias. Situated about 640 feet below sea level, its size today is 13 miles long and 8 miles wide at its widest part. The Sea of Galilee. By the way, it's important when you read these stories to have a map handy, to see where Jesus came from, the region he and his ministry began in. This is a personified body of water, a who and not a what. Of special interest is the wind pattern on this sea. Two large valleys on the west side usher in strong afternoon breezes from the west, particularly during the dry season. These can quickly churn up waves on the peaceful waters to a height of 7 or more feet. In the winter, a similar wind pattern from the east can produce the same effect. No experienced fisherman would sail in such storms, and if he were caught in a sudden squall, he would do anything possible to return to shore quickly. This personified body of water has a tempestuous nature. Now, Jesus, walking on the Sea of Galilee toward his disciples who are in a boat, has been variously interpreted. Some scholars consider it a nature miracle, which means an action that clearly surpasses the so-called laws of nature. Miracle is a nice post-Enlightenment word, a violation or an overriding of the physical laws governing the universe. While this might make sense to the modern post-Enlightenment mind, our ancient ancestors in the faith lived by the simple perception that whatever happened actually happened. While it may have been a singular, rare, or infrequent experience, it wasn't contrary to anything. If our ancestors in the faith saw it, they believed that it really happened. If it was beyond customary human ability, what they saw, it had to have some other than human explanation, but still a personal explanation. Everything that happens, people in this world ask, not what happened, but who done it. Some person had to be responsible for it. Other scholars consider this event to be an appearance of the risen Jesus that has been retrojected back into his earthly life. They connect the story linguistically by the sea, upon the sea, particularly with John chapter 21, and also with the literary form of other resurrection appearances. These biblical scholars also deny any real parallels between this story of Jesus walking on the sea with Old Testament stories of walking on or through the sea, like, for example, Job chapter 9, verse 8. And also similar stories in pre-gospel polytheistic literature about Orion, Poseidon, Euphemus, Aphrodite, and others. These scholars correctly note that none of these stories could have served as a model for the evangelists, but they neglect to take seriously the fact that such perspectives about certain kinds of persons coursing over the personified sea were quite common in the ancient Mediterranean world. Moreover, these biblical scholars do not provide a satisfactory explanation of what the first readers or hearers of such a story about Jesus walking on the sea would have gotten out of it. Invariably, in these scholars, there is too hasty a segue into a theological interpretation linked with the risen Lord and the Eucharist.